We continue now at the top of Daf Chav Daled Amud Aleph in Meseches Nazir. This is Nazir Daf 24a. And the previous summit, the Gemara said that a person should always be early to do something for the sake of a mitzvah. And the Gemara learned this from the daughters of Lot, because the older daughter of Lot, she was with Lot for the sake of a mitzvah one night earlier than her younger sister. And because of that, Zachsa v'kadma arba doros b'Yisrael malchus. So she merited that she was 4 generations earlier in terms of her descendants ruling over the Jewish people. Rashi over here says, Zachsa v'kadma arba doros b'Yisrael, Ovad Yishai, David, Shlomo. The 4 generations are Ovad Yishai, David, and Shlomo. V'ilut Seira lo asis b'Yisrael ad rechavam dehava minam ha'amonis. And the younger sister, so her descendants, they only ruled over Klal Yisrael. That only was by the generation of Rechavam, who came from Namo ha'amonis. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Ha'isha shenadra b'nazir, if a woman takes a vow to be a nazir, v'yafrisha behemta, she separates her animals for the karbanos, v'yachar kach hefer la ba'ala, and after that, her husband annuls her vow for her. So im shalo haisa habehema, so if the animal belonged to him, so teitze v'tira be'eder, so the animal can go out, it can graze with the flock. But if the animal that she sanctified was her animal, so hachatos tama. So if it's the animal that was separated for a chatos, that has to die. The idea over here again is, it turned out she's not a nazir. Viola tikrav ola, the one that was separated for a carbon ola can be brought as an ola, and shlamim tikrav shlamim, and the one that was separated as a shlamim can be brought as a shlamim. This carbon shlamim, the meat of the carbon shlamim, can only be eaten for one day. It has a similar restriction for a shlamim that would come for Nazirus. Ve'einon tu'unin lechem, but unlike shlamim that comes for Nazirus, this carbon shlamim is not going to require the bread. Hayula mos stumin. Let's say she had money that was designated for the karbanos, but it wasn't designated which money is for which carbon. So yiplu linadava. So then that money should be used as donations for the public karbanos of the Beis HaMikdash. Maos mefurashin. Now let's say she separated money and it was explicit what the money was used for. This money was for chatas, this for ola, etc. So demei chatas yelchu liyam hamelech. So the money for the chatas, that has to go to the yam hamelech. It cannot be used. Lo nenin velo mo'alin bahen. You can't derive benefit from that money, but also if you do derive benefit, it's not going to be considered me'ila. Demei ola yaviu ola, and the money that was separated for an ola, that can be used for a carbon ola. Umo'alin bahen, if a person uses it for personal use, that would be me'ila. Demei shlamim yaviu shlamim, and the money that was separated for shlamim, you can use that to bring shlamim. V'nacholin liyom echad, and again that shlamim, the meat is only eaten for one day. Ve'ein tu'unin lechem, and there's no requirement to bring breads along with that carbon shlamim. And the Gemara says, Man tana debalo mishtabidlo. Who is the Tana of our Mishnah who says that the husband does not have an obligation to bring his wife's karbanos on her behalf? Rashi over here says, Man tana de lo mishabidlo, man hu tana de tani, because what does our Mishnah say? It says, De kasavar shem haisa avehema shalo. Let's say she sanctified an animal that was really his animal. Lo chayla le kedusha klal. Again, the case being where the Nazirus was nullified, there's no kedusha whatsoever on the animal. Diamar teitze v'tir beidu. That's what it says. The animal can go out and graze among the flock. Mishum debal lo mishabidlo lahavi karbanosah klal. It sounds like from our Mishnah, it's because the husband has no obligation to bring her karbanos. V'chim afrisha lo lihi Nazirus. So when she separated it for the purpose of the Nazirus, it's like being makdish something that's not really his. Dein b'dvar of klum, it has no effect, and the animal has no kedusha at all. Sounds like the husband has no obligation at all to bring her karbanos. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chisda says, Rabbanan here. Our Mishnah follows the Rabbanan. The Salka daitach Reb Yehuda, because if you think our Mishnah is Reb Yehuda, Amai teitze v'tira be'eder, why should the animal go out and graze among the flock? Hamishtabid lo, he has an obligation to bring her karbanos. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Reb Yehuda says, Adam maybe carbon asher alishto. Let's say you have some karbanos that it depends if the person is poor or wealthy, what kind of carbon they have to bring. And so Reb Yehuda says a person brings a carbon of a wealthy person on behalf of his wife, even if his wife is poor, but he is wealthy, so he does have an obligation to bring her karbanos, and that's why she's obligated, or he's obligated, in the carbon asher. V'chein kol karbanos she chayeves, and that goes with all karbanos that she's chayev to bring. He has that obligation. Shekach kasavla, that's what he writes for in the ksuba. Kol achrayis dislach alay min kadamos dana. All obligations that you have from beforehand, I take upon myself, and that includes the karbanos. So in any case, the Gemara is suggesting now that our Mishnah cannot follow Reb Yehuda. And the Gemara says, Rava says, Afilu Tamer Reb Yehuda. You can even say that our Mishnah is Reb Yehuda. because ki mishabed la b'milsa detzricha. When is he obligated to her? That's by something that she needs to do, she's required to do. However, in this case, b'milsa de lo tzricha lo, in a situation where there's no obligation, like over here where the Nazirus was nullified, so then he takes no obligation upon himself either, and that's why the animal has no kedusha. And the Gemara continues, Ika Diamri, some have the version as follows, Man Tana, who is the Tana of our Mishnah? Amar Rav Chisda says, Rabbi Yehuda, our Mishnah follows Rabbi Yehuda, and the Gemara says, because his obligation only extends by things which are requirements for her. But if it's something that's not required of her, then the obligation does not extend to him. The Rabbanan, and the Gemara says, because if you're going to say our Mishnah is the Rabbanan, lo meshabed lo klal, he has no obligation to her in that case. It's not only in this situation where there's no obligation because the Nazirus is nullified. According to the Rabbanan, there's no obligation of the husband to bring the karbanos of his wife. But the Gemara says, V'yela hechi dami de meshabed lo, what scenario could you come up with according to the Rabbanan where he is meshabed to her, he is responsible, kagon diakni Allah, maybe he actually gave over the animal to her for this purpose. However, the Gemara says that's not going to work. Because the moment he gave it over to her completely, so if it's hers, now once it becomes hers, the halach would actually be that the animal does have sanctity, and therefore it would not be allowed to join the flock. Rashi over here says, V'yala hechi dami de meshabed. The Gemara says, where would he be meshabed? Uvoy lo k'ma k'Rabbanan. The Gemara is trying to say maybe there is a scenario where we can say our Mishnah follows the Rabbanan. Kagon de akniya nehila l'nizirusa. Let's say he gave her the animal for the purposes of the karbanos of her nazirus. But there the Gemara said, Akati lo mesukma k'Rabbanan. That's not going to work. The Mishnah still cannot be like the Rabbanan. The kevan de akniya, because once he gives it over to her, have it in afsha, it's hers. The chatas thomas, and then the carbon chatas would actually have to die. It wouldn't be allowed to rejoin the flock. We need to come up with a scenario where the animal is allowed to rejoin the flock, where it has no kedusha. And that's why the Mishnah cannot follow the Rabbanan. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Dalid Amud Beis.